Escalated deputies have made an arrest after a murder last night. They have charged Charles Carson-Dowdy with the second-degree murder of his girlfriend. Now, family members have identified the victim as 30-year-old Star Tucker.
And Tucker's family spoke with WEAR's Haley Samples just a few hours ago. Haley, they shared with you just who Star Tucker was.
On January 2nd, 2025, Escambia County deputies responded to a shooting at an apartment complex in Northwest Florida. The victim was Star Michael Tucker, a 30-year-old U.S. Air Force medic and mother. Within hours, investigators identified Charles Jerome Carson-Dowdy, a fellow service member, and her boyfriend as the primary suspect. What followed was a rapid multi-agency investigation involving surveillance footage, digital evidence, and a cross-state arrest. As prosecutors began piecing together the timeline, the case expanded beyond a single night of violence into a federal prosecution.
Bob Sue, her sister tells me in just a matter of hours, her worst nightmare became her reality.
I'm sorry, I don't have all the right words. I'm tired. I haven't slept. I hardly eat. I'm just exhausted. I feel like I'm in a nightmare.
That's Taraya Tucker. She's the younger sister of Star Tucker. Her family says the 30-year-old was an active member of the Air Force and a Florida A&M alum. They say she also just started a relationship with Charles Carson-Dowdy.
He seemed sweet, he seemed innocent, he seemed charming.
Thursday night, deputies were called to the parking lot of this apartment complex on Baldridge Drive. Sheriff Chip Simmons says they were responding to a call for shots fired and found Tucker in the parking lot.
The investigation revealed that the victim's boyfriend had fired about 15 to 16 shots and struck her 7 times at least, and then used her car to drive over her.
Tucker later died at the hospital. Her family later learning Carson-Dowdy was arrested and charged in the crime.
He didn't give off he could do something like this, but you never know until it's too late. I don't understand why he did what he did, because he could have just left. I just want justice as of now, and I won't stop until I get it.
Deputies say Charles Dowdy was arrested and booked into jail in Baldwin County, Alabama. They say he was in Tucker's car and had stopped after getting a flat tire. Tucker's family still in shock, wanting to know why.
We're going to continue to gather evidence, even though he's already in jail, and we're already working with the state attorney's office on prosecution. We're going to continue to build the case even and make it even stronger so that he will remain in jail.
Looking at Carson-Dowdy's criminal history, he was arrested in Mobile in 2023 as a fugitive wanted for assault in Texas. In the studio, I'm Haley Samples.
Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin. Star Michael Tucker was 30 years old at the time of her death. She was born and raised in the United States, where she spent her early years within a close family structure that included her parents and siblings. Those who knew her describe her upbringing as structured and supportive, with an emphasis on education, discipline, and long-term planning. From a young age, Star demonstrated a consistent focus on stability and professional growth. She pursued higher education after high school and enrolled at Florida A&M University, a historically black university known for its strong academic programs. At Florida A&M, Star focused her studies on health-related coursework that aligned with her interest in medicine and service. She successfully completed her degree requirements and graduated, positioning herself for a career in healthcare and public service. During her academic years, Star expressed interest in a career that combined medical knowledge with structured service. This interest later influenced her decision to pursue a military path rather than entering the civilian healthcare workforce immediately. Her long-term aspirations included professional advancement, financial security, and providing a stable future for her child. Following her graduation, Star made a decision to join the United States Air Force. Her enlistment was driven by a combination of career development, service commitment, and access to advanced medical training. She entered the Air Force as an enlisted service member and was trained as a medical technician, a role requiring precision, adherence to protocol, and the ability to operate in high-pressure environments. At the time of her death, Starr was assigned to the 919 Special Operations Medical Squadron, a unit responsible for providing medical support to special operations personnel. Her role involved assisting with medical evaluations, supporting patient care, maintaining medical readiness, and working within a team of healthcare professionals in a regulated military environment. Her service record reflected steady performance. She maintained required certifications, followed operational procedures, and met the standard expected of her rank. Colleagues described her as reliable and methodical in her work, often adhering closely to schedules and military protocols. There were no publicly known disciplinary actions or performance issues associated with her service. Starr's daily routine typically involved reporting to her assigned duty location, completing medical support tasks, and participating in required training or administrative responsibilities. Like many service members, she balanced military obligations with personal responsibilities, including parenting and maintaining her household. Within her unit, she maintained professional relationships with fellow service members. There were no documented conflicts within her workplace prior to her death. Outside of her military role, Starr was a mother to a young son. Parenthood was a central aspect of her personal life, influencing her daily routines and long-term planning. She structured her schedule around work obligations and childcare responsibilities, aiming to maintain consistency and stability. Starr lived in an apartment complex in Escambia County, Florida. Her residence was located near her duty station, allowing her to manage commuting time efficiently. Neighbors and acquaintances described her living arrangements as orderly, with no reported disturbances linked to her household prior to the incident. Her social circle consisted primarily of family members, co-workers, and a small group of friends. She was not known for frequent social outings and generally maintained a routine centered on work, home, and parenting. Her habits reflected a structured lifestyle, consistent with military service requirements. In conversations with friends and family, Starr had discussed future plans that included career advancement within the Air Force, continued education, and long-term stability for her child. There were no indications that she anticipated immediate personal or professional upheaval. Charles Carson-Dowdy was identified as the suspect in Starr Tucker's death. He was 30 years old and also affiliated with the military at the time of the relationship. The two met through overlapping social or professional environments connected to military life. Their initial interactions developed into a romantic relationship. The relationship lasted approximately several months. During this period, the two spent an increasing amount of time together, communicating regularly through calls and text messages. There is no public record indicating that the relationship extended beyond this time frame or involved cohabitation. During the early stages of the relationship, friends and co-workers observed that it progressed quickly. The pace of communication was frequent, and the couple spent significant time together relative to the length of the relationship. Starr and Carson-Dowdy did not formally live together, but there were reports of regular visits. Communication between them was consistent, with daily contact through digital messaging and phone calls. Initially, there were no public reports of conflict. However, some individuals later indicated that the intensity of the relationship was noticeable given its short duration. As the relationship continued, concerns began to surface. There were reports of jealous or possessive behavior exhibited by Carson-Dowdy. Some arguments were observed or later described by individuals familiar with the situation. These disputes reportedly centered on communication, trust, and perceived loyalty. Friends noted changes in Starr's behavior, including increased caution in discussing her personal life and adjustments to her routines. There were indications that she attempted to manage or de-escalate conflicts rather than openly address them. There were accounts suggesting prior confrontations and brief separations, though the relationship continued intermittently. Statements made by Starr to friends and family suggested growing tension, but no formal reports or protective orders were filed prior to the incident. In the days leading up to the incident, communication between Starr and Carson-Dowdy continued. Text messages and calls were exchanged, though the tone reportedly reflected unresolved disagreements. There were indications of tension, including arguments and discussions about the status of the relationship. Some messages contained language that was later described as concerning, though details were not publicly released in full. There were attempts by Starr to either create distance or address ongoing issues, while communication continued. The incident occurred at a residential apartment complex located along 9 Mile Road in Escambia County, Florida. The complex consisted of multiple multi-story residential buildings arranged around shared parking areas and internal access roads. Each building was positioned with exterior stairwells and balconies facing the parking lot, allowing clear visibility from several units into the area where vehicles were parked. The parking area where the shooting occurred was an open lot directly adjacent to one of the apartment buildings. The space was designed for resident parking, with marked stalls and a central drive lane. Surveillance cameras were installed on select buildings and near entry points to the complex, covering portions of the parking area and access roads. The incident took place at night. Lighting in the area was provided by overhead parking lot lights and exterior building fixtures. Visibility was limited but sufficient for witnesses in nearby units to hear and partially observe activity in the parking lot. Investigators determined that the victim, Starr Tucker, and the suspect, Charles Carson-Dowdy, were together at the apartment complex shortly before the incident. Evidence indicates that an argument or confrontation occurred in or near the parking area. The precise nature of the initial exchange was reconstructed through witness statements, digital evidence, and surveillance footage. At some point during the confrontation, the suspect produced a firearm. Investigators later confirmed that the weapon was discharged multiple times. The number of shots fired was established through shell casings recovered at the scene and subsequent forensic analysis. The victim sustained multiple gunshot wounds during the encounter. Evidence showed that the shots were fired at close range. After the gunfire, the sequence escalated further. Investigators determined that the suspect entered the victim's vehicle and used it to strike her after she had already been shot. The timeline from the first gunshot to the suspect departure was brief, measured in minutes rather than an extended duration. Following the incident, the suspect left the parking area in a vehicle and exited the apartment complex. Multiple residents reported hearing gunshots coming from the parking lot. Some witnesses described hearing several rapid shots rather than a single discharge. These reports prompted calls to emergency services. Emergency dispatch received multiple 911 calls within a short time frame. Callers reported gunfire, screaming, and a vehicle leaving the area at high speed. Dispatch logs recorded consistent information regarding the location and timing of the shots. While some witnesses were able to hear the incident clearly, visibility varied. A limited number of residents reported seeing movement in the parking lot, including a person falling and a vehicle moving abruptly. Due to darkness and distance, detailed visual descriptions were limited. Law enforcement officers were dispatched immediately following the 911 calls. Patrol units arrived at the apartment complex within minutes of the initial reports. Officers located the victim in the parking area upon arrival. Emergency medical services were also dispatched and arrived shortly after law enforcement. Paramedics assessed the victim and determined that she had sustained fatal injuries. She was pronounced deceased at the scene. Officers secured the area and established a perimeter around the parking lot. Initial observations included visible gunshot wounds, blood evidence on the ground, and damage consistent with a vehicle striking a person. Officers noted the absence of the suspect and began treating the scene as an active homicide investigation. Investigators conducted a systematic examination of the scene. Multiple shell casings were recovered from the parking area, indicating where shots had been fired. The location of the casings helped establish the shooter's position and movement during the incident. Blood evidence was documented across a section of the parking lot. The distribution of bloodstains was analyzed to determine where the victim had been standing or fallen. Investigators also documented tire marks and vehicle damage consistent with the victim being struck by a car. The victim's vehicle showed visible damage, including exterior impact marks. The scene was photographed extensively, and measurements were taken to preserve the spatial relationships between evidence items. Investigators collected surveillance footage from cameras located within the apartment complex. While coverage was limited, available video captured portions of the incident, including vehicle movement and activity in the parking area. Additional footage was obtained from nearby traffic cameras and private surveillance systems along surrounding roadways. This footage was used to establish the suspect's route of travel after leaving the complex. By synchronizing video timestamps with dispatch records and phone data, investigators created a detailed timeline of events beginning shortly before the shooting and extending to the suspect's departure from the area. An autopsy was conducted to determine the cause and manner of death. The medical examiner documented multiple gunshot wounds, as well as injuries consistent with being struck by a vehicle. The cause of death was determined to be homicide. Ballistics analysis linked the recovered shell casings to the firearm associated with the suspect. The trajectory of the bullets and wound paths were analyzed to reconstruct the shooting. Additional forensic testing supported the sequence of events described by witnesses and captured on video, confirming that the gunfire preceded the vehicle strike. Following the incident, the suspect left the apartment complex in a vehicle. Investigators determined the direction of travel based on surveillance footage and witness reports. The time between the shooting and the suspect's departure was brief. Law enforcement issued alerts to surrounding agencies once the suspect was identified and believed to be fleeing. Evidence showed that the suspect crossed state lines shortly after leaving the scene. This interstate movement expanded the scope of the investigation and triggered coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies. Investigators tracked the suspect's movements through a combination of video footage, license plate data, and phone records. The suspect did not return to the scene and did not attempt to contact authorities during this period. Law enforcement received information from third parties that assisted in locating the suspect. Phone records indicated communication between the suspect and others after the incident. Using this information, officers were able to narrow down the suspect's location. He was ultimately located in another state and taken into custody without incident.
First on 5, a man arrested for murder. He's accused of killing a woman in Escambia County, Florida last night at an apartment complex in Ferry Pass.
And listen to this. She was shot, then run over, and deputies tell WKRG News 5's Alexa Daly her boyfriend is responsible.
A brutal killing at the crossings on Baldridge Drive Thursday night.
The victim was shot at least 7 times by her boyfriend and then run over at least twice.
The sheriff's office says the victim, identified by family as 30-year-old Star Michael Latrice Tucker, was transported to a local hospital where she died. Investigators say the suspect, 30-year-old Charles Jerome Carson-Dowdy, left the scene in the victim's Jeep Cherokee.
We contacted the Alabama authorities, and they did find that Jeep Cherokee with a flat tire on the interstate just inside the Alabama line.
Carson-Dowdy was taken into custody by Spanish Fort Police and booked into the Baldwin County Jail just before 1 a.m. Friday. He will be extradited to Escambia County, Florida.
You can't just escape one jurisdiction and think you're going to get away. I think that the speed at which we developed the information was important, and obviously the partnerships and relationships that we've built, the communication and cooperation with other agencies was very important.
Family members described Tucker as a bright light, a phenomenal mother, and someone who was selfless and determined. They say they hope justice is served. The sheriff says Carson-Dowdy faces a second-degree murder charge. In Escambia County, Alexa Daly, WKRG News 5.
Following the fatal shooting in Escambia County, Florida, investigators quickly determined that the suspect, Charles Carson-Dowdy, had fled the scene in a vehicle. Law enforcement agencies issued a regional alert based on vehicle information and cell phone data. Within hours, authorities tracked the suspect's movement across state lines into Spanish Fort, Alabama. The arrest occurred on a roadway near a causeway in Baldwin County. According to law enforcement reports, the suspect's vehicle had become disabled due to a mechanical issue involving a flat tire. At the time officers located him, Carson-Dowdy was stopped on the roadside and no longer in motion. The vehicle was positioned on the shoulder, and traffic conditions were reported as controlled, allowing officers to approach without interference from passing vehicles. The mechanical failure of the vehicle played a key role in preventing further flight. Investigators later confirmed that the suspect had not voluntarily stopped, but was forced to do so due to the condition of the vehicle. Officers from local Alabama law enforcement agencies, acting on information provided by Florida authorities, initiated contact with the suspect. The arrest was conducted without resistance. Carson-Dowdy was taken into custody without incident, and no injuries were reported during the arrest process. During the arrest, officers conducted a preliminary search of the suspect and the immediate area. Items recovered included personal belongings and the vehicle itself, which was later seized as evidence. Law enforcement documented the scene, secured the suspect, and ensured the area was safe before transporting him from a roadside location. The arrest marked the end of a multi-hour search and confirmed the suspect's identity and involvement in the case. Coordination between agencies in Florida and Alabama was critical in locating and apprehending the suspect in a short time frame. After being taken into custody, Carson-Dowdy was informed of his rights. According to official records, the suspect did not provide a detailed statement at the scene. Any communication was limited and procedural. Law enforcement noted no significant behavioral incidents during or immediately following the arrest. The suspect was transported to a detention facility for processing. During transport, standard procedures were followed, including documentation of custody transfer and evidence handling. At no point during transport was force reported as necessary. Once booked, Carson-Dowdy remained in custody pending extradition and further legal proceedings. Authorities continued gathering evidence while preparing formal charges. Following the arrest, prosecutors in Escambia County, Florida filed state homicide charges against Carson-Dowdy. The charge reflected allegations that he intentionally caused the death of Star Tucker using a firearm. The suspect made an initial court appearance where the charges were formally read. Given the severity of the offense and the circumstances of the arrest, bond was either denied or set at a level that effectively ensured continued detention. Prosecutors emphasized the nature of the crime, the use of a firearm, and the suspect's interstate flight when arguing for pretrial detention. Early statement from the prosecution focused on establishing probable cause, outlining the sequence of events, and confirming that the investigation was ongoing. At this stage, the case remained under state jurisdiction while additional evidence was reviewed. As investigators continued reviewing evidence, the scope of the case expanded beyond state charges. Federal authorities became involved due to several qualifying factors. These included interstate travel, use of electronic communications, and firearm-related violations that met federal thresholds. The suspect's movement across state lines following the homicide allowed federal prosecutors to assert jurisdiction under interstate violence statutes. Additionally, evidence suggested that digital communication played a role before and after the crime, further supporting federal involvement. Firearm violations were also central to the federal case. Investigators examined whether the suspect was legally permitted to possess a firearm at the time of the offense and whether the firearm was used in connection with other federal crimes. These factors collectively led to a parallel federal investigation alongside the state case. A federal grand jury later returned an indictment charging Carson-Dowdy with multiple offenses. These charges included federal murder-related counts, interstate domestic violence, firearm offenses, and related crimes connected to electronic communications. The grand jury process involved the presentation of evidence by federal prosecutors, including witness testimony, digital records, and forensic findings. The indictment signaled that prosecutors believed sufficient evidence existed to proceed to trial. If convicted on the most serious federal charges, Carson-Dowdy faces potential penalties up to life imprisonment. The federal case added significant legal weight and expanded the possible consequences beyond those available under state law alone. Digital evidence plays a central role in the prosecution's case. Investigators analyzed text messages, call logs, and electronic communication records exchanged between the suspect and the victim. These records were used to establish a timeline of interactions leading up to the incident. Prosecutors also alleged patterns consistent with cyberstalking, including repeated communications and monitoring behavior. Phone location data helped track the suspect's movements before and after the homicide, corroborating witness accounts and surveillance footage. The digital evidence allowed investigators to reconstruct a sequence of events with precise timestamps, strengthening the case by aligning communications with physical actions. Physical evidence recovered from the scene included a firearm, shell casings, and the victim's vehicle. Ballistics analysis linked the firearm to the shell casings found at the scene, establishing a connection between the weapon and the fatal shots. The autopsy concluded that the cause of death was gunshot wounds, with additional trauma documented. Forensic findings supported the prosecution's reconstruction of how the incident unfolded, including the order of events and the use of the vehicle after shooting. Scene reconstruction experts analyzed evidence placement, vehicle positioning, and trajectory data to create a detailed account of the incident. Witness testimony forms another critical component of the case. Civilian witnesses reported hearing gunshots and observing activity in the parking area. Their accounts helped establish the timing of events. Law enforcement officers provided testimony regarding the crime scene, arrest, evidence collection, and investigative steps. Military colleagues contributed contextual testimony related to the suspect and victim's professional background and interactions. Together, witness testimony supports the physical and digital evidence, reinforcing prosecution's narrative and addressing potential gaps in the timeline. In the immediate aftermath of Star Tucker's death, her family was notified by law enforcement and military representatives. Public statements released by relatives focused primarily on confirming her identity, acknowledging the investigation, and requesting privacy as legal proceedings began. Family members emphasized her role as a mother and service member, but avoided discussing details of the relationship or the circumstances of the killing, citing the ongoing nature of the case. Attention quickly turned to custody considerations for Tucker's young child. With the child's mother deceased and the father not publicly identified as a suspect, family court proceedings were initiated to determine temporary and long-term guardianship. These decisions were handled outside the criminal court system and followed established family law procedures. The child was placed with close relatives while custody matters were reviewed, ensuring continuity of care and stability during the investigation. Legal representatives for the family coordinated with prosecutors to remain informed about case developments. Victim advocacy services were also assigned, providing guidance on court appearances, notifications of hearings, and access to documentation. The family's involvement in the criminal case remained limited to procedural participation, victim impact preparation for potential sentencing, and cooperation with investigators as needed. The U.S. Air Force formally acknowledged Star Tucker's death shortly after law enforcement confirmed the homicide. Statements issued through official channels identified her as an active duty or reserve medical professional and recognized her service record. Military leadership avoided discussing investigative details, deferring to civilian and federal authorities. Honors and memorials were conducted in accordance with military protocol. These included a formal remembrance ceremony attended by fellow service members, commanders, and medical unit personnel. The focus of these events was Tucker's professional service, training contributions, and role within her squadron. Flags were lowered, and her name was included in unit memorial records. In parallel, internal reviews were initiated by the military. These reviews are standard when a service member dies under violent circumstances, particularly when another service member is involved. The scope of such reviews typically includes examination of duty status, command awareness of any reported concerns, and compliance with military policies regarding personal conduct and off-base incidents. These internal processes operate independently from criminal proceedings and do not determine guilt or innocence. Military officials also reviewed support systems available to service members, including access to counseling, reporting mechanisms for domestic disputes, and intervention procedures. While these reviews do not always result in public findings, they are used internally to assess policy effectiveness and identify areas for improvement. The case drew significant public attention due to the victim's military status, the location of crime, and the nature of the charges. Local residents expressed concern over safety within residential communities, particularly in apartment complexes where violent incidents can occur without warning. Law enforcement agencies responded by increasing patrol visibility and holding informational briefings regarding emergency reporting procedures. Media coverage extended beyond the local area, with national attention focusing on the intersection of domestic relationships, firearm access, and military affiliation. Coverage remained largely centered on verified court filings, arrest records, and official statements. Commentary from advocacy organizations highlighted the broader issue of domestic violence, but avoided referencing specific allegations beyond what was publicly documented. Public discussions expanded to include warning signs in personal relationships, the role of bystanders, and the challenges of early intervention. These discussions occurred through community forums, social media, and public safety meetings. While the case prompted increased awareness, officials emphasized that the criminal proceedings should not be influenced by public opinion and must be resolved through the court system. As of the most recent updates, the case remains active within the federal court system. Following the indictment, the defendant was formally arraigned and pretrial procedures commenced. The court established a schedule for hearings, evidence disclosure, and motion filings in accordance with federal criminal procedure. Pending court dates include status conferences, evidentiary hearings, and motions to address admissibility of evidence. Defense attorneys have the right to challenge the prosecution's case through pretrial motions, including motions to suppress evidence, requests for discovery, and procedural objections. Prosecutors, in turn, are required to disclose evidence and respond to defense filings. The legal strategy on both sides remains largely procedural at this stage. Prosecutors are focused on establishing jurisdiction, presenting forensic findings, and linking digital and physical evidence to charges. The defense is expected to scrutinize investigative methods, chain of custody, and witness reliability. No trial date has been finalized, as federal cases of this scope often involve extended pretrial timelines. If the case proceeds to trial, jury selection will take place, followed by opening statements, witness testimony, and presentation of evidence. Alternatively, the case could be resolved through plea negotiations, though no public indication of such discussions has been confirmed. Sentencing considerations would only occur after conviction or plea agreement. The case of Star Tucker follows a clear chronological progression. Her background as a military medic and mother, a brief relationship that escalated into conflict, a fatal incident in a residential setting, the suspect's flight across state lines, and the transition from state charges to a federal prosecution. Each phase of the case has contributed to its complexity and legal significance. Federal involvement has expanded the scope of accountability. Charges related to interstate activity, firearm use, and alleged digital conduct elevate the case beyond a local homicide investigation. Federal jurisdiction allows for broader investigative resources and carries more severe potential penalties, including life imprisonment if convictions are secured. Despite the volume of evidence presented publicly, unanswered questions remain. These include the full extent of prior interactions between the victim and suspect, whether warning signs were formally reported, and how earlier intervention might have altered the outcome. These questions are expected to be addressed through testimony, evidence, and judicial findings as the case progresses. The pursuit of accountability continues through the legal system. Court proceedings, not public commentary, will determine responsibility and outcome. Until a verdict is reached, the case remains unresolved, with its final conclusions dependent on evidence, due process, and the decisions of the court. If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.